Today we will study the contract of guarantee. I divided it into two parts. The first one being from Article 2047 to Article 2065. Article 2047. By guarantee, a person called the guarantor binds himself to the creditor to fulfill the obligation of the principal debtor in case the latter should fail to do so. If a person binds himself solidarily with the principal debtor, the provisions of Section 4, Chapter 3, Title 1 of this book shall be observed. In such a case, the contract is called a suretyship. Article 2047 gives us the definition of guarantee. So actually, there are two contracts here, the contract between the creditor and the debtor, and the contract between the creditor and the guarantor. The guarantor undertakes to fulfill the obligation of the principal debtor in case the latter should fail to do so. So si guarantor, he undertakes na babayaran niya ang pagkakautang ni debtor kung hindi makabayad si debtor. Subject, of course, to certain conditions which we will talk about later on. Actually, this is a special promise to answer for the debt, default, or miscarriage of another person that is in unenforceable contracts under 1403, paragraph 2, letter B. Therefore, a contract of guarantee has to be in writing to be enforceable. So, what are the characteristics of a guarantee as a contract? First, it is accessory because it is dependent for its existence upon the principal obligation guaranteed by it. Number 2, it is subsidiary and conditional because it takes effect only when the principal debtor fails in his obligation, subject to limitations, of course. Number 3, it is unilateral because it gives rise only to a duty on the part of the guarantor in relation to the creditor and not vice versa. And it may be entered into even without the intervention of the principal debtor, kahit hindi alam na principal debtor, kahit ayaw na principal debtor, there can be a contract of guarantee between the creditor and the guarantor. And finally, number 4 characteristic, it requires that the guarantor be a person distinct from the debtor because a person cannot be the personal guarantor of himself. So these are the characteristics. Number 1, accessory. 2, subsidiary and conditional. 3, unilateral. 4, that the debtor and the guarantor must be separate persons. Article 2048. A guarantee is gratuitous unless there is a stipulation to the contrary. So the general rule, it is gratuitous, exception where the parties agree that the contract be for a consideration. Article 2049. A married woman may guarantee an obligation without the husband's consent, but shall not thereby bind the conjugal partnership except in cases provided by law. So, this article tells us that where a married woman enters into a contract of guarantee, she binds only her separate property, yung paraphernalia property niya, yun lang ang pwede niyang ipangako na pambayad utang in the event na hindi nagbayad si debtor. However, there are two situations where she can bind the conjugal partnership or the absolute community property. Number 1, where the husband consents to the contract. And number 2, even without the consent of the husband, where the contract redounds to the benefit of the family. Sa Family Code, these are Articles 70, 71, 94, Paragraph 3, 121, Paragraph 3, and 122. These are the situations where the contract redounds to the benefit of the family. So, may I repeat, when a married woman enters into a contract of guarantee, she binds only her separate property, except, number 1, where the husband consents or gives his consent to the contract, and number 2, where the contract redounds to the benefit of the family. Article 2050. If a guarantee is entered into without the knowledge or consent or against the will of the principal debtor, the provisions of Articles 1236 and 1237 shall apply. 1236 says, the creditor is not bound to accept payment or performance by a third person who has no interest in the obligation, unless there is a stipulation to the contrary. Whoever pays for another may demand from the debtor what he has paid, except that if he paid without the knowledge or against the will of the debtor, he can recover only insofar as the payment has been beneficial to the debtor. And Article 1237 says, whoever pays on behalf of the debtor without the knowledge or against the will of the latter cannot compel the creditor to subrogate him in his rights, such as those arising from a mortgage guarantee or penalty. So as a general rule, the creditor is not bound to accept payment or performance by a third person who has no interest in the fulfillment of the obligation, and the exception is if there is a contrary stipulation. So where a person known as guarantor pays for the debt of the debtor, the general rule is he can collect the whole amount from the debtor. That is, if there was consent on the part of the debtor. However, if the payment is made without the knowledge or against the will of the debtor, what are the effects? And these are the effects under 1236 and 1237. Number 1, if he paid without the knowledge or against the will of the debtor, he can recover only insofar as the payment has been beneficial to the debtor. So halimbawa, si debtor may utang na 10,000 kay creditor. At hindi alam ni guarantor, nagbayad na pala siya ng 5,000. So si guarantor, nung malaman niyang hindi nakabayad si debtor, nagbayad siya ng 10,000 kay creditor. Pero hindi niya alam, bayad na pala yung 5,000. So magkano ang pwede niyang kolektahin kay debtor? Number 1, if the payment was made with the consent of the debtor, he can collect the whole amount of 10,000. Yun ay binayad niya kay creditor. Pero kung if the payment by the guarantor is without the knowledge or against the will of the debtor, he can collect only 5,000 kasi yun lang naman ang napakinabangan ni debtor dahil nga nung magbayad sa creditor ay bayad na pala si debtor ng 5,000. Yun ang 1236. Sa 1237, if the guarantor pays without the knowledge or against the will of the debtor, he, meaning the guarantor, cannot compel the creditor to subrogate him in his rights, such as those arising from mortgage guarantee or penalty. So halimbawa, yung utang na yun ay may collateral, may mortgage. At nung bayaran ni guarantor yung utang ni debtor, if the payment was made with the knowledge and consent of the debtor, then subrogated siya. Siya ang pwedeng mag-foreclose ng mortgage na collateral. Pero if he paid without the knowledge or against the will of the debtor, he cannot be subrogated in the rights of the creditor, in our example, to foreclose the mortgage. Hindi niya pwedeng i-foreclose kasi nga yung pagbabayad niya ay walang pahintulot ni debtor. Article 2051, a guarantee may be conventional, legal or judicial, gratuitous, or by onerous title. It may also be constituted not only in favor of the principal debtor, but also in favor of the other guarantor, with the latter's consent or without his knowledge or even over his objection. This article tells us that guarantee can be conventional, meaning it can be freely entered into by the creditor and the guarantor. Legal, meaning it may be constituted based on a provision of law. Judicial, it may be constituted pursuant to a court order. Furthermore, it can be gratuitous, na pag-usapan na natin ito, na it may be without compensation, or by onerous title, meaning for compensation. The second paragraph says it may also be constituted not only in favor of the principal debtor, but also in favor of the other guarantor with the latter's consent or without his knowledge or even over his objection. This pertains to a sub-guarantee or double guarantee. Ibig sabihin, yung guarantor ni debtor, pwedeng mayroon siyang sarili niyang guarantor. Yung kanyang undertaking to pay for the debt of the debtor, may be guaranteed by another person. Pwedeng pangakuan ng iba pang tao. Ang tawag natin doon ay sub-guarantor. So, we call that situation sub-guarantee or double guarantee. And this sub-guarantee may be constituted even with the consent of the original guarantor, or without the knowledge of the original guarantor, or even over the objection of the original guarantor. So, parang ganon din. Yung guarantee kasi, pwede siyang i-constitute even without the knowledge of the debtor, or with the debtor's consent, or over his objection. Ganon din naman yung sub-guarantee. It may be constituted with the consent of the original guarantor, or without his knowledge, or even over his objection. Article 2052, a guarantee cannot exist without a valid obligation. Nevertheless, a guarantee may be constituted to guarantee the performance of a voidable or an unenforceable contract. It may also guarantee a natural obligation. So, guarantee is an accessory contract. Therefore, it is indispensable that there should be a principal obligation because guarantee cannot stand alone. And the law further states that it may guarantee the performance of a voidable or unenforceable contract or even a natural obligation. Article 2053, a guarantee may also be given as security for future debts, the amount of which is not yet known. There can be no claim against the guarantor until the debt is liquidated. A conditional obligation may also be secured. This article refers to a continuing guarantee or suretyship. It is one which is not limited to a single transaction, but which contemplates a future course of dealings, covering a series of transactions generally for an indefinite time or until revoked. So, for example, G, guarantor, executes a contract of guarantee today, June 1, 2020. But this contract of guarantee is good until December 30, 2020. Ibig sabihin, ginagarantiyahan niya ang lahat ng pagkakautang or magiging utang ni debtor from today until December 30, 2020, kahit na magkano man yun. So, this is what we call a continuing guarantee or guarantee for future debts. Hindi pa niya alam sa ngayon kung magkano mauutang ni debtor, pero ginagarantiyahan niya, pinapangakuan niya na in the event na hindi magbayad si debtor, ay siya ang sasagot, siya ang magbabayad. So, yun ang tinatawag nating continuing guarantee or suretyship. However, hindi siya pwedeng singilin hanggang hindi pa naliliquidate or hindi pa nakikwenta yung lahat ng pagkakautang ni debtor. By the time na dumating na ang December 30, 2020 at hindi nakabayad si debtor, hindi siya pwedeng singilin. Hindi pwedeng singilin si guarantor hanggang hindi pa nakikwenta ng malinaw kung magkano lahat ang nautang ni debtor. Article 2054. A guarantor may bind himself for less but not for more than the principal debtor, both as regards the amount and the onerous nature of the conditions. Should he have bound himself for more, his obligation shall be reduced to the limits of that of the debtor. So, halimbawa, G, guarantor, enters into a contract of guarantee for 10,000. Pero ang nautang ni debtor ay 15,000. Ibig sabihin, 10,000 lang ang sagot niya out of the total debt of 15. That is what is meant by he can bind himself for less. Pero on the other hand, halimbawa, he binds himself for 10,000, but the principal debtor obtains a loan of only 5,000. Therefore, dito sa second paragraph, should he have bound himself for more, his obligation shall be reduced to the limits of that of the principal debtor. So, kahit na 10,000 ang kanyang guarantee, pero ang utang ni debtor ay 5,000 lang, then 5,000 lang ang pwedeng singilin sa kanya. Article 2055. A guarantee is not presumed. it must be express and cannot extend to more than what is stipulated therein. If it be simple or indefinite, it shall comprise not only the principal obligation, but also all its accessories, including the judicial costs, provided with respect to the latter, that the guarantor shall only be liable for those costs incurred after he has been judicially required to pay. A contract of guarantee is not presumed. It must be expressed, and not only must it be expressed, it must be in writing, because it is actually a special promise to answer for the debt, default, or miscarriage of another, which is unenforceable unless in writing. That is pursuant to Article 1403, Paragraph 2, Letter B, on unenforceable contracts. Furthermore, it must be strictly construed. In case of doubt as to whether the guarantor is liable or not, the doubt should be resolved always in favor of the guarantor. Article 2056. One who is obliged to furnish a guarantor shall present a person who possesses integrity, capacity to bind himself, and sufficient property to answer for the obligation which he guarantees. The guarantor shall be subject to the jurisdiction of the court of the place where this obligation is to be complied with. So this article gives us the qualifications of a guarantor. Namely, number one, that he possesses integrity. Number two, he has capacity to bind himself. And number three, he has sufficient property to answer for the obligation which he guarantees. However, the creditor may waive any or all of these requirements. Article 2057. If the guarantor should be convicted in the first instance of a crime involving dishonesty or should become insolvent, the creditor may demand another who has all the qualifications required in the preceding article. The case is excepted where the creditor has required and stipulated that a specified person should be the guarantor. So this article gives us the situations where the creditor may demand another guarantor who has all the qualifications required in Article 2056. So what are the situations where he may demand another? One is where the guarantor is convicted in the first instance of a crime involving dishonesty. And number two situation, where he should become insolvent. So those are the situations where the creditor can demand another guarantor as substitute. But that right does not belong to the creditor where he was the one who required and stipulated that a specified person should be the guarantor. Halimbawa, nung mangutang si debtor kay creditor, sabi ni creditor, kunin mo si X as guarantor. So, kinuha ni debtor si X as guarantor. And then later on, X is convicted of a crime involving dishonesty. Can the creditor now require the debtor to present another person as a guarantor instead of X? No, because in the first place, he was the one who required and stipulated that that person should be the guarantor. So, yung karapatan niya na humingi ng substitute guarantor ay nasa kanya kung hindi siya ang pumili sa guarantor na yun. So, we go to effects of guarantee between the guarantor and the creditor. Article 2058. The guarantor cannot be compelled to pay the creditor unless the latter has exhausted all the property of the debtor and has resorted to all the legal remedies against the debtor. This article refers to the benefit of excusation or benefit of exhaustion that is available to a guarantor. This is basically the main distinction between a guarantor and a surety. A guarantor has this benefit, but a surety does not have this benefit. So, ano itong benefit na to? It says here that the creditor has first to exhaust all the property of the debtor and has to resort to all the legal remedies against the debtor before he can hold the guarantor liable. Meaning, pag hindi nagbayad si debtor, dapat kasuhan muna ni creditor. He has to exhaust all the ordinary and including the extraordinary remedies. Ano yon? Like specific performance, collection. Kasuhan mo na siya ng collection. And then kung kulang, then he may proceed to the extraordinary remedies including the action subrogatoria and action pauliana. Ano yung action subrogatoria? This is the procedure where the creditor looks for the debtor of his debtor and collects from those debtors kung mayroon. At yung action pauliana, he annuls the dispositions made by his debtor in fraud of creditor. So, mahabang proseso muna ang dapat pagdaanan bago niya pwedeng singilin si guarantor. So, this is what we call the benefit of excusation or benefit of exhaustion available to a guarantor. Article 2059. The excussion shall not take place, number 1, if the guarantor has expressly renounced it. Number 2, if he has bound himself solidarily with the debtor. Number 3, in case of insolvency of the debtor. Number 4, when he has absconded or cannot be sued within the Philippines unless he has left a manager or representative. And number 5, if it may be presumed that an execution on the property of the principal debtor would not result in the satisfaction of the obligation. So these are the situations where the benefit of excusation may not be availed of by the creditor. Number 1, if the guarantor has expressly renounced it. Yung guarantor mismo ang nagsabi na pwede na siyang maging liable, magbabayad na siya na huwag nang i-exhaust ang ari-arian ng principal debtor, na siya ay pwede nang maging liable kaagad, automatic ang kanyang liability. So, para siya naging surety. Sa number 2, if he has bound himself solidarily with the debtor, in which case he becomes a principal debtor, hindi na siya guarantor. Number 3, in case of insolvency of the debtor, wala nang ari-arian si debtor, so what's the point of filing actions in order to exhaust his property? Number 4, if he has absconded or cannot be sued within the Philippines, so tumakas na siya, hindi na siya makita. Hindi na rin kailangan ng benefit of exhaustion or excussion. And finally, if it may be presumed that an execution on the property of the principal debtor would not result in the satisfaction of the obligation, so wala na siya, nakikita naman ng creditor na wala na siyang ari-arian. So what's the point in bringing action in order to execute his property kung wala nang nakikita? So under these situations, the guarantor may be held liable immediately without the benefit of excussion. Article 2060. In order that the guarantor may make use of the benefit of excussion, he must set it up against the creditor upon the latter's demand for payment from him and point out to the creditor available property of the debtor within Philippine territory sufficient to cover the amount of the debt. So under this article, kung hindi nagbayad si debtor kay creditor at si creditor siningil kaagad si guarantor without exhausting first the property of the debtor and resorting to all legal remedies available to the creditor against the debtor, then it is up to the guarantor to set up the benefit of excussion by way of defense. So, dapat exhaust muna ni creditor yung mga ari-arian ni debtor. He has to resort to all legal remedies, including the ordinary and the extraordinary remedies available to the creditor, bago niya pwedeng singilin si guarantor. At si guarantor naman, according to this article, should point out to the creditor available property of the debtor within the Philippines to cover the amount of debt. So, tutulong na dapat si guarantor na maghanap ng ari-arian ni debtor na pwedeng i-execute ni creditor para mabayaran yung utang para maligtas yung sarili niya sa pagkakautang. So this is in support of his benefit of excusation. Article 2061. The guarantor having fulfilled all the conditions required in the preceding article, the creditor who is negligent in exhausting the property pointed out shall suffer the loss to the extent of said property for the insolvency of the debtor resulting from such negligence. So, halimbawa, mayroon ng final judgment yung court in favor of the creditor against the debtor at nasa execution stage na, this is the time na dapat tumulong si guarantor na maghanap ng mga ari-arian ni debtor para masama sa execution bilang pambayad utang ni debtor. Now, halimbawa may mga nai-point out na mga ari-arian si guarantor kay creditor, pero hindi naman in-execute ni creditor, pinabayaan lang. Then it says here that the creditor should suffer the loss to the extent of the value of said property. So halimbawa, ang total debt ni debtor ay 100 million. Pero nakakita sa guarantor ng property ni debtor amounting to 10 million. Ito'y ipinoint out niya, tinuro niya kay creditor para i-execute. Pero pinabayaan lang ni creditor, hindi niya in-execute. Then it says here that the creditor should suffer the loss. In other words, kung kulang man ang kanyang na-execute na ari-arian, yung 10 million na yon hindi dapat ikarga kay guarantor. Hindi dapat maging liable si guarantor doon kasi hindi niya kasalanan na yun ay hindi na-execute ni creditor. Article 2062. In every action by the creditor, which must be against the principal debtor alone, except in the cases mentioned in Article 2059, the former shall ask the court to notify the guarantor of the action. The guarantor may appear so that he may, if he so desire, set up such defenses as are granted him by law. The benefit of excusation mentioned in Article 2058 shall always be unimpaired, even if judgment should be rendered against the principal debtor and the guarantor in case of appearance by the latter. This article tells us that the action by the creditor must be against the debtor alone. Hindi dapat isali si guarantor sa action against the debtor. However, the court should notify the guarantor of the existence of the action so that the guarantor may decide to appear or not to appear. If he appears, of course, he can set up defenses available to him, but if he does not appear, still his right of excusation is intact. Halimbawa, hindi siya nag-appear and then the judgment becomes final, still he will be given an opportunity to be heard after finality before execution because this is a procedural due process. Article 2063. A compromise between the creditor and the principal debtor benefits the guarantor but does not prejudice him. That which is entered into between the guarantor and the creditor benefits but does not prejudice the principal debtor. So halimbawa, ang utang ni debtor kay creditor ay 10,000, pero nagkaroon sila ng compromise agreement na gawin na lang nilang 8,000. So that compromise will benefit the guarantor. In other words, the guarantor will be liable for only that amount in the event that he is made liable later on. Pero halimbawa naman, ang pagkakautang original ay 10,000 pero nagkasundo si creditor at debtor na gawin na nilang 12,000. Then that will not affect the liability of the guarantor. The guarantor cannot be prejudiced by that compromise. Kung ang liability ni guarantor ay 10,000 originally, ay it will remain 10,000 kahit na si creditor at debtor ay nagkasundong gawing 12,000 yung utang. Dito naman sa second part, that which is entered into between the guarantor and the creditor benefits but does not prejudice the principal debtor. So halimbawa, si creditor at si guarantor nagkaroon ng compromise agreement. Sabi nila ay instead na payable in 30 days, gawin na lang nilang payable in 20 days. That is more onerous. Therefore, that will not benefit or that will not affect the principal debtor. Kung ang usapan 30 days, as to the principal debtor, 30 days pa rin. But, kung ang naging agreement ni creditor at guarantor ay gawin na nating 60 days ang payment, that will benefit the debtor. In other words, the debtor will have the same period to pay his obligation. Article 2064. The guarantor of a guarantor shall enjoy the benefit of excusation both with respect to the guarantor and to the principal debtor. So, halimbawa, the creditor is unable to collect from the debtor despite having exhausted all the legal remedies available to him against the debtor, then the guarantor becomes liable. However, the guarantor of the guarantor also has the benefit of excusation. So, kung yung liable na yung guarantor, ganun din dapat ang mangyari. Dapat the creditor should exhaust all the legal remedies against the guarantor before he can make the sub-guarantor liable for the debt of the guarantor. Article 2065. Should there be several guarantors of only one debtor and for the same debt, the obligation to answer for the same is divided among all. The creditor cannot claim from the guarantors except the shares which they are respectively bound to pay unless solidarity has been expressly stipulated. The benefit of division against the co-guarantors ceases in the same cases and for the same reasons as the benefit of excusation against the principal debtor. So in Article 2058, we learned of the benefit of excusation. Dito sa 2065, it speaks of the benefit of division. Ibig sabihin, if there are more than one guarantor, these guarantors, as a general rule, are liable jointly. They are liable solidarily only if there is a stipulation to that effect. But if there is no stipulation, then the liability of the guarantors is joint. Ibig sabihin, equal sharing sila sa liability. So, halimbawa, si principal debtor is indebted for 10,000. And the creditor, after having exhausted all legal remedies available to him against the debtor, still fails to collect that amount from the debtor, then liable na yung mga guarantors. Assuming there are two guarantors, guarantor A and guarantor B, then equal sharing sila sa liability. Guarantor A will be liable for 5,000 and guarantor B will be liable for another 5,000. So, equal sharing sila sa liability. That is a general rule. The exception is where there is a stipulation of solidarity between or among the guarantors, in which case solidary ang kanilang liability. Halimbawa, the creditor, after having exhausted all legal remedies against the debtor, still fails to collect from the debtor the amount of 10,000. Then, assuming there are two guarantors, then the creditor can collect the entire amount from each one of them. He can collect the entire amount from guarantor A, or he can collect the entire amount from guarantor B. And then A and B can come together afterwards and reimburse each other. So that is the rule in 2065, the benefit of division among the guarantors.